think we're going to kick off because, like in modern times, you get to watch this live if you want to, or you can watch it recorded. So for those that are live, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to listen to us. And hopefully you find it an engaging and insightful conversation. We've been gabbing along already for 5-10 minutes, and we're quite excited to keep the conversation going with the rest of you in the room. Please, as we're talking, if you have a question, put it in the chat. I'll call for questions at different times, but it's sometimes if it's in your head, pop it down and we'll remember to get to it, because this is the first series in our 5-part series about HR tech. It's also my first series ever as a pioneer. So I'm very honored today to be wearing my pioneer's hat, and yeah, a bit nervous. It's also my first real thing since I'm off of mat leave. My little boy turns 1 next week. So bear with my nursery rhymes and potentially my eagerness to have a conversation about tech and not about diapers and nap times. So yeah, anyway, welcome. Thank you. Series 1, we're going to talk all things, we wish we could say if we were super vulnerable and had really smart people in the room with us. So I will be that person where I will ask as many questions as I can think of to my 2 lovely speakers. And before we kind of start, I'd love you to meet them. So Matt, if you want to take a second to introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure. Thank you everyone for joining. I don't have a baby myself, so I'm at 100% capacity right now. So yeah, my name is Matt. I used to work for Talent.io, so I saw that some of you might be clients, some of you might be familiar with the company. I've left Talent.io a couple of months ago, and I'm now a CTO for a SaaS startup called SalesPath. But most of my career has been spent on HR tools.
Well, welcome. We're very, very lucky to have you, and sitting in a WeWork in Paris, looking very, very French today in your outfit. So you are playing the role brilliantly.
Thank you.
And Suling.
Okay, hi everyone. Thanks for joining. So I'm Suling. I'm the Chief Technology Officer, CTO of the Pioneers, and I'm also an honorary associate professor at UCL. So I'm a full stack developer, and I have a PhD in computer science. I've always been really interested in how we can use technology to help people work together, which is what kind of got me to join the Pioneers. And my research is about studying people's personality and how it affects how they work together. And currently, I'm helping Chantal build a people operating system. So I have been on both sides of HR tech, so both the buyer and the seller, and sometimes guilty of making some of them. So yeah, as the buyer, mainly work in startups, small teams up to 20 people. So we look at a lot of tech to buy. And then in the past, I've also developed and sold HR solutions to kind of like startups of 100 people or bigger companies like 10,000 people. So the pace is really different for both kinds of things. And what I realize is HR tech can be quite tough. So when times are difficult, yeah, people just cut that. That's the first thing to go, and it's very sad. Yeah, but it's kind of true. Yeah. So that's me.
Wow, thank you, both of you. I feel super honored and definitely feel like the person that can ask all the silly questions, because already I've heard the word SaaS, CTO, full stack. We're going to get to all that, because if you are like my background, so again, I'm Chantal Wilson. I work for the Pioneers as a director and also kind of in product management right now. But I've spent my whole career with people and being a decision maker truly for the last kind of 5 years in people tech. So I have a lot of battle scars of where I've made the wrong decision, and sometimes where I've made the right decision. So actually, I'm very excited to be here, and I will try to give the lens of a people director or a key individual in an organization that are trying to solve the problems, right? Because people tech ultimately is trying to solve problems to help people be happier, be more productive, whatever it might be, but we're problem solvers. And I think I can lend to this conversation in that. So I'd kind of first like to start with a poll, if that's okay. just so we can understand who's on the call and how we can shape our questions. So it would be really great if we can just use, let me just share now. Okay, so I think you should be able to see some stuff now. There we go. And again, this is for us to understand, yeah, we want to shape the conversation so it's useful. So it's great for us to understand a bit of where you'd rate yourself on all things tech, and you know, what describes your role in the organization or as a business. So I can see them coming in, a lot of decision makers and a lot of people having to deal with the impact of decision makers. Great. And a lot of tech so far. Excellent. Sorry, is everyone just reading? Wow, the master in tech. I think I know who answered that actually. Excellent. All right, thank you so much for answering that. That will help us as speakers understand who you are. So thank you. All right, let's start with some stories. Let's just start chatting. And actually, we've kind of pre-prepped a story that will help us go with the flow. So I'm going to kick it over to Matt and go, tell us a story about when you've been in the world of HR tech, and whether you're a decision maker or what role you were playing, but help us understand some of the woes or insight you have in that world.
Right. So as I said, I used to work for Talent.io, which is an HR tech tool. It's a SaaS, so a website. And we've built the platform for a long time, but the most notable project, I would say, related to this webinar would be a project we did maybe 2 years ago, in which we integrated 5 or 6 ATS providers. So can I get a sense of whether you're familiar with ATS, the term ATS? Probably yes.
Maybe a way, yeah, I've got some yeses. Applicant tracking system, to be really technical, right? The old schoolness of what it was.
Right.
Yeah,
so,
lots of thumbs.
So essentially, this was a project to integrate one HR tool with all other HR tools. And if you think, if you're getting confused with the terms like API integration, OAuth, these are terms that can also be confusing for developers, as I've seen on the project, because it kind of falls outside of the traditional web development cycle. It's not every day that you develop an API integration. So, you know, even developers can get frustrated or dumbfounded by this.
You know, that's really interesting, because I just assume that that is like a badge of honor that everyone in tech must know, because the word integration is everywhere. Like, it is the hot term, I feel like, right now when it comes to HR tech. Like, there are some that have over 100 integrations. I saw an ad of over 1,000 integrations. So when you say even developers, like, where did this boom come from? Truly, like, why is this now the key thing on the market right now, integration?
So I would say that there are a lot of tools, that's for sure. And when you build a product, you want to focus on what you do best. And the first years of the business, you probably want to have a limited scope, except you want your clients to use the tool, and you want the tool to go along well with the other dozens of tools they use. So instead of re-implementing features that their other tools do, you'll just delegate all that work that has been done by other people, other companies. And how do you do that? Well, through integrations.
And, you know, I've been stung with integrations before where you hear like we have, you know, all of these different integrations, but actually my understanding is just because you have an integration doesn't mean it's going to, you're all that data in one system is going to work into the other. Like there's a relationship between how those two things work. If you're a decision maker buying HR tech, how can you make sure that in your dream world, right, they integrate, therefore they're perfect and it all fits and it's lovely? Is there anything that you can do as a decision maker to help, a safety net that you can do to help validate whether or not that integration is really going to do what you think it's going to do?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's no going around it. You need to take a look at the details and what does that integration give you exactly. And it's often maybe not clear, but yeah, it should be defined clearly. So to be precise, integrations are often one way or two ways. So the data, you're mostly concerned with the data. Data from one tool goes to another, or the other way around, or both ways. As an example, at Talent.io, which is mostly a sourcing tool, you source your candidates, and then you might want to manage the pipeline of candidates on your favorite ATS. It was a one-way integration where the data from the source candidates goes to your ATS, but whatever you do on the ATS does not go back to Talent.io. So one way. But you have integrations that go both ways, a lot of Slack integrations as well for messaging. So, you know, to come back to the core of your question, you need to dig in and figure out what you get for free and what you don't.
That's a very good tip, and I'm sure, Su-Ling, you've got. I can see in your eyes you've got a couple of things to say. So, what would you add to that part of the conversation?
I think I really, really wanted to say, like, for all of these things, the devil's in the detail. And when you know, the thing that I think gets a lot of bias is that the HR tech will be like, okay, we support all these integrations. Look, we have 50 integrations. It looks so good, but when you actually check what exactly are you integrating, like what if I integrate with you, what data am I getting? And you realize that some of them is just kind of like, so for example, an ATS to HRIS integration. So they can, for example, only integrate by giving you the details of candidates that you have already decided to hire, but not the others. And sometimes not even the process or how the length of things. And yeah, so they choose what to integrate. And because of that, you don't own the data, and a lot of very useful information is lost. But when you just look at what it says, it seems fine. And that's, yeah, one of the things, like one of the catch-all for integrations is like, what is the detail of it?
You know what? And I think that's a really great story. So thank you, Matt, for sharing. And I think that whole deep dive into the integrations, I've been stung on that multiple times in my career, even before integrations was like a hot topic. And I think one of the things I've learned from you, Su-Ling, is, you know, just doing the desktop exercise before you meet with a supplier. Go and look at what their integrations are, not just like the logo of like, we integrate with this ATS. Actually look at, well, what's the API? Because a lot, I think, of really new people tech players on the market, they're listing that stuff out. You can actually just click view integration, view API, and see all of the detail. And I think for me, there's an alarm bell that kind of goes off naturally now, where if that information isn't available, there's probably a reason why. And actually, if it is available, it's probably because they've done a really great job at it. And I can think of a very classic in hospitality. There's quite a few big players in the world of ATS and HRIS, and we integrate, and launching both systems, and all they integrated was the person's name. So all I had was Su-Ling candidate, Su-Ling employee, which actually, from a user, doesn't help
you
me
can
at
type
all.
it in. Yeah, it saves you like 1 second.
1 second, you know. And like, I think that is like a really good thing to think about, is if it's not solving a problem significant enough, actually, like, don't tick the box. You're not solving the problem. It might be integrated, but it's kind of useless. You know, you need a whole profile in order to do it. So I think recap, devil in the detail, I think is a great shout. And actually, the suppliers that I think do this really well have it really clear on the website, and just do the desktop exercise and figure it out. I'm looking.
And also, I really like the direction things are going. So more and more vendors are kind of making their APIs and the details open. Only recently, I think there is still quite a few. Like there was one where it's like, if you want to look at, so they have an API, but if you want to look at their API, you have to be a partner. In order to be a partner, you have to pay £15,000. And then I'm like, right, that's it.
Like that it doesn't work, does it? Right.
Yeah,
and I think
it.
Ben's just made a comment, and I'm gonna probably throw it over to Matt. You know, Ben, you're talking about like 9,000 possible two-way combinations, and I'm assuming that's because if you're using, you know, you're saying the average company is using 137 SaaS products. I can relate to that in the world of people, actually, on the complexity of trying to get best in class products. You can end up with just a huge stack. And when he's talking about 9,000 possible two-way combinations, what does your tech brains do when you see the word 9,000 combinations? Is it pure fear, excitement, or like a combination of the two?
Well, I think my immediate reaction is I'll probably not make it that big a number, because there will be a lot of integrations and a lot of places to go wrong. 9,000 is a lot.
Matt, anything from you on that?
Yeah, well, obviously not every integration makes sense.
Yeah.
Like you wouldn't integrate, I don't know, Talent.io with your with PayFit. Wouldn't make any sense. But yes, there are a lot of possibilities, and that's actually quite an issue for startups, because there's this pushback by clients to adopt multiple tools. Like they feel overwhelmed by this multiplicity. Yes, there are bigger players that offer systems that do not require integration, because they already package a bunch of tools. And so maybe sometimes bigger companies might prefer that kind of system, even though it's less flexible. So, you know, you need to find that sweet spot in the trade-off between flexibility and multiplicity.
So really, and you know, how my last kind of build on that, I would say, is relevance. Like, you know, when you're, you know, 100 people to 10,000 people, different things are relevant to you. And so I think there's this maybe FOMO feeling at times where you're like, I need to have everything. And actually you then end up with, like you said, Suling, the complexity that you just don't need, right? And so we're, you know, at the Pioneers, we talk a lot about the relevance of, you know, at the point of need. There's sometimes you just don't need it. Pen and paper, I know it's scary to sometimes tech people, but like, I'm an old school restaurateur. Pen and paper did a good job for a lot of things. And I think we just need to isolate where is it relevant that things integrate and that there's a tech feel, and does it match to the culture of your business? Because sometimes it won't. The worst thing in the world is you get this tech stack that feels completely different than everything else in your business. And I think that's quite a alarming trap I think people fall into as they grow. Okay, thank you so much on that conversation. We're gonna like switch gears into Soothing. You're gonna talk to us about, you know, your stories, so we'll listen to some of your woes.
Well, I think one of the things that come to mind is like when I was a buyer for new HR systems, and yeah, that was like, yeah, it was horrible experience, like even for tech person. So, you know, it was a tech startup, lots of technical people, and some of us are researchers or scientists, and we decided that we probably, well, before that, we kind of didn't have a system, which was another quite not very good story. It's actually more expensive to not have a system than have a system. Yeah, and we learned it the really, really hard way. There's lots of stories to that. Actually, side story, we kind of made the CTO very, very ill for a few days just by celebrating his birthday. Dietary requirements missing.
You know my feeling about dietary requirements and how important that is to make people feel inclusive. So I feel.
Yeah. So we thought, okay, we need a HR system, but there were so many out there, and they all, when you look at the website, they all say they have all these things, and it just, all the features are there, they look fine, and we thought, okay, we'll just try 5 top ones, and then we can get all our employees to try them, and then we'll rate them. And what we found, like, it was a nightmare. It was a nightmare to move between systems, because actually the data you put in, you can't take it out. So we have to manually enter the data. And then what I found was that as part of the team choosing the HR system, the CEO was like, okay, this looks good. And I was like, yeah, it looks good. I think I can imagine myself using it. And then 2 weeks later, I imagined wrong. So no one used it. They hated it. So what I learned was that software is kind of, HR software is for your people. It's not software for you. Yeah. And you can choose the system however you like. If your people don't like using it, it really doesn't take. And on the high level, it may seem that all the different vendors provide similar features, but once we started using it, we find that it actually doesn't fit how we do things. And it's not like we are doing things that weird, but they just have their own thing. And it's like, for the kind of like SAS ones, it's like you kind of follow their worldview, or it's a highway. And then for the more expensive ones,
Sorry, Suling, I think that's such a good point on the underlying assumptions. And I think you just said it brilliantly, like the worldview. Like, not only are you buying a software that's going to help you do something with features, you're buying their worldview. And quite often that skews the experience way more than you think. And I think you said to us about before the call when we were chatting around, was it the person that wasn't doing it right, or was just the process so alien or so bureaucratic that, so like which one was it? Was it the tech's fault, or was it the person's fault? What would you say to that?
I think when people don't use tech, it's always the tech's fault. So that's, especially if it's the tech, the tech's meant to help the people. And I think in this case, for example, there was I think the HR system came with a feedback, functionality, and the way they do feedback, I think it irritates a lot of our managers, kind of like using a 5-star system and every weekend. It's just not the way we would do it. And it kind of also annoyed the staff, but it was what the software thought we should do, is their opinion on the behavior of the people. So that comes with it. So that's what we found. And then, so it just doesn't fit our specific way of working. So some of them, we kind of worked around it, but it's not supposed to be like that. So you have to, work around the software that you pay a lot of money to get.
No, and it's like, I used to call it the tiny rebellion. Like every Monday in our business, when I worked at Honest, we'd have a little tiny rebellion in our business, because they knew they had to log on to systems that they didn't want to use. And that tiny rebellion just took energy, resources, and a lot of, once you're labeled a system as bad, it's very hard to scrub that graffiti off of a system as an HR director, because you've got like a really short window for you to, I think, launch something, get people engaged, and shift the ways of working. And if you don't do that effectively and it's labeled bad, it can be the best system in the world, but actually a peer-to-peer feedback, I think, is really important. So when you are launching or you're picking a system, I think the advice that you're saying is look through the user case. Like, people are going to use this in their like day-to-day lives at work. Is it a pain in the ass, or is it something that's actually going to help you do your job? And if you don't look at it from their angle, I think you can make really bad decisions, like you said.
And I think the lesson I learned from this experience is, to the software vendor, don't ask high-level questions like, does it do onboarding? Does it do feedback? Ask, how exactly does your software do onboarding? how exactly does it do feedback? Because it's the details, because they all do onboarding. They all say they do. Yeah. What exactly is another question.
Yeah, and I think Bob's made a comment really similar on, where you start to look at that. So if you're looking at the experience that the user is going to have, then you're obviously going to say, well, for onboarding, we need this, right? Versus just saying, actually, here's the information I get. That's really exciting. Actually, if you look at it from how is that user going to experience this? What are the tension points? What's the different workflows, as you said, Bob? I think that is a very key point when you're looking at making a decision about tech. I thought about my story. I love both of your stories. I think they were really helpful, and I'm a bit nervous mine might not be helpful, but I think what I can talk about really comfortably is being a decision maker for HR tech. And a couple years ago, Honest Burgers, where I worked, had made a decision to take out one of the big systems that they had. And in order to do that, we had to replace it with quite a few smaller systems. And the thinking was best in class. And I think a lot of people directors will be thinking like that too. And what I found is we were in a tendering process. I felt like I was always in a tendering process, but we were in a tendering process on workforce management, which is really simple, right? It's either clocking in, clocking out, plus rota and forecast. That was the specific targeted solution that we were looking for. And as we were tendering, we were running them through like algorithm tests. So could they do predictive sales? They all said they could. Who was actually really good at it? So we gave them data and tested. And we had a clear front runner, was the best at predictive sales. But what we found is then when we trialed it, they were doing so much other stuff. They had bolted on all these other features that was really getting into the people space. And our managers didn't like using it. They had to skip through screens. There was multiple clicks. And they were just saying, all we needed to do is those three things: clocking in, clicking out, forecasting, and rotas. And what it's doing is absence. I now need to log, HR queries on it. It had grown. So our whole theory was we wanted to go best in class, and we wanted to replace. They were the front runner, but the experience for the person for all of those added features, we just didn't need, and we were going to have to pay for them. So you're paying for features that you're not going to use. And I think the lesson I learned as a decision maker was, even if it's going to perform the best in terms of the specific functionality I wanted, the experience meant people weren't going to use it. And people were still going to use Excel spreadsheets and just throw data crap in, crap out. And so we were never actually going to use the good functionality to its fullest. And I think when we talk about module building, the reason why I really believe that, like Lego module building pioneersism, is I've experienced that, where you have features that you just don't use. And so trying to get this beautiful tech stack that integrates, that's not complex, that works, that it feels right. I mean, what a daunting task. I feel like we're asking all of our people on our call to, find a unicorn. If I was to ask you the top tip for anyone on the call as a decision maker, how do you start? What's the starting point to make a great decision on your people tech stack? What would you say? Ben or Suling? I mean, Matt or Suling.
I would say start small. Start with a really small problem and small issue, and build up from that. If you're building from the ground up, that's what I would say. Like if you launch a startup, you probably want to start with the basic stuff and move on to either other features in the tool that you decided to use, or multiply the tools. That might not be the context for everyone. If you're already using a full-fledged system, then you need to weigh the pros and cons. As engineers, we do that all the time. We weigh the pros and cons between tools that have a lot of overlap. Some are missing features, some have too many or too too expensive. So you've got the same problem on the business side or on the HR side. So have a conversation with the stakeholders and figure out the trade-offs. Are you ready to pay that much for the additional features that you're not going to use? Are you okay with having 2 more tools and with the risk of being overwhelmed? Have that conversation. There's no one good answer that fits all. Depends on your context. So talk about the context.
Right. Su-Ling, what about you?
I think for me as a buyer, as on the buyer side, you should never be afraid to ask questions, ask a lot of questions. There are no stupid questions, actually, there really aren't. And if the vendor makes you feel ashamed of asking questions, I think it's because they don't want you to know the answer. It could sometimes be that. And one of the things that is quite important to ask is when you decide, you're going to either add a system or switch, like add a HRIS or switch it, you need to ask, like, does it work well with my processes, my other existing applications, my systems? And what systems do I need to change? Because this is the other thing. Sometimes it's like, it's kind of like a pack of cards. It just, so you change one system and then you find out that it doesn't play very well with 2 of your existing ones, and then you're like, you have to change more and more and more. It's like, when does this end? And also, what effect does it have on the people? Because a lot of this kind of people tech, you can't just turn them on and it's all systems go. So there is a period of transition. So how does it affect the users, and what processes do you need to change, and actually what is the cost of switchover? So it's not just the price of the software that you are thinking. So there's a lot of unknown costs, time, implementation, switchover, and all that. And the other thing I found was what happens to the data in your previous systems. So I have seen cases where people switch payroll and pay slips gone. And the things that the people aren't notified to get it beforehand. So it's like, it's a nightmare. And all these things can be resolved if these questions are asked. And sometimes I feel maybe it's too much to ask, but I feel like it would probably be very nice if the vendors could have a kind of like checklist of things you have to do or you need to consider. And I think that's a fair thing to do, but that's almost always not what happens. And I think sometimes you can also be unwilling system changes. So for example, when we were using accountants, we realized that they change payroll systems without telling us, because but it affects the people. And the things that we have to think higher than just the application or just a bug. For example, if someone wants to get their payslip, they don't get it, it affects their, if they spend 1 hour trying to get it, it wastes their time and they don't feel so good. There's always kind of effects. One thing affects another. So it's all,
No, and it's so interesting you say that on the, like, I think my experience is we spend a lot of time looking at the cost of just the system, and we miss the other costs, like you said, implementation, onboarding, just the changes in process. Like, if in the industry that I come from, you add an extra hour, that can throw your labor cost out. Like that, yes. You're working on fine margins when it comes to that. So I think we often misconsider that. But I also think on the other side, when it comes to the return, we don't spend enough time balancing that return well enough either. So actually, if it is saving you time, that's not just like a friendly thing to say. Like that, there's money. Money is attached to that. So have you worked out the value of that, or is it headcount? Like if you're automating or making things more efficient, do you need less people that you currently have, and could you reposition that labor or that resource somewhere else?
Yeah,
And
and it's
kind
also
of
more than, yeah, so it's also more than just time. If someone feels good versus unhappy, for example, issues with pay slips, payments, it's not just time. They feel not happy, rightly so, if they're not paid correctly because the system made a mistake and because the switchover is bad, and you get unhappy employees, rightly so, and then they can't do work, or they're worried because they haven't been paid on the right time, and then yeah, all these things cost. Yeah.
No, absolutely agree. And I think if we combined all that, Matt, you're talking about, the engineering mindset. How do you weigh it up? How do you consider the context? How do you balance what is right? And I think, Suling, you're talking about, the return and the cost associated. It's not just what's on the P&L or in your bank. It's that human cost. It's the emotional cost. It's the process cost. So, take your time, make a plan, consider it. And if someone's selling you the dream, ask a whole lot more questions is what I think we all said here. So thank you for sharing. Oh, sorry. Thanks for sharing your stories. I want to get into some questions. So there's like two things I want to do. So one, for those on the call, we would really love to hear your questions versus our questions. So please put them in the chat. That would be wonderful to hear things that are on your mind when it comes to any question, terminology, opinion about this. You've got two CTOs that do great stuff on the call. I'm sure you want to know some stuff from them. But to kick it off, let's start with something simple. Lots of different terms, lots of acronyms in the world of tech. What kind of terminology do you think is misunderstood? And if you were to pick one and explain it, what would it be? I'm going to go to Paris first. Matt, over to you.
So what term is most commonly misused is the question, right? Right. So probably artificial intelligence these days. It's used by everyone, but only a few actually do artificial intelligence. So in HR, maybe there are a couple of tools. It's more present in other fields, I would say. But a lot of companies market their features as artificial intelligence, but very few do. Yep, AI are a box of ifs, indeed. Most are.
And then what about a term, if you could teach people? What's something that you wish people knew more of? So if you were putting your learning hat on, what term would you use?
Right. So I would probably pick interface or responsibility. These are two tech terms that are really important. They're at the core of every major architecture conversation between engineers, but they also make sense when you consider HR tools. So the interface goes along with the responsibility. The responsibility is really what you expect it to be like. You have a tool, either a tech tool or a SaaS tool. What exactly does it do? What does it give you for free? What does it require? That's the responsibility. And the interface is, how do you communicate with it? So in order to do what the tool does, for instance, manage payslips, what do you need to provide in order to make that tool work? Does it need access to your database of employees, or does it manage it itself? What's the interface? That's if you understand all the interfaces, you'll be able to understand how the integrations work, and you'll be able to build your system properly. Yep.
We're gonna ignore.
I like Ben's comment. Yeah, abstraction.
Yeah.
Actually, there's a saying like every problem in computer science can be solved by a new layer of abstraction. I think Jack Extra said it. But yeah, I think now there's so many layers.
Yeah, I mean, I'm already lost. So we're going to just go back 2 steps of responsibility and interface. I think are great terms. Interface is one that I've definitely been in meetings that have meant so many different things that I left going, I didn't think that's what an interface was. And I think what you're, recommending, if you were to say like the one tip on responsibility, like how do I understand that as a decision maker, how to show up and have that responsibility that you're talking about? What would you tell me to do?
So could you just repeat that last sentence?
As a decision maker, if I want to ensure I understand your version of responsibility, that I can show up into a meeting and make sure I'm on the right page, what's a tip that you would suggest that I do?
Right. Well, maybe we need to contextualize a little bit. So, what kind of conversation exactly would you are you talking about?
I'm about to buy your product. I want to buy it.
Got it.
Yeah. Let's put it into an example.
Right. Let's pick an HR tool as an example. Well, I know Talent, so let's pick Talent.io. Well, if you want to use Talent, you probably already have systems in place, like to manage your candidates, for instance, an ATS. And so you'll need to understand what Talent provides. So what's the interface, when you talk about an interface, you talk about the input and the output. So what should be done on the product and what should be done outside of the product, or another way to look at it. Figure out what action needs to be done by whom and where the data goes. That's really the most important. Does that answer your question? I'm not sure.
Yeah. No, it does. And I think that's really on the either side, right? Where you're saying kind of coming in and coming out. So how is that going to work throughout the whole process? Not everything is going to happen in that product. Therefore, what's happening at the beginning and the end of it is really helpful. Su-Ling, anything you'd add on that would be helpful.
So I think you were asking like what's the most kind of like wrongly used term. And actually suddenly one thing came to mind. It was a workflow. That's the most recent one that a lot of HR tech are using. So everyone has now caught on to that. And then like every platform saying they are doing workflows. And then when you drill down what kind of workflows, then you realize that it's just automatic emails. That's the extent, like automated reminders, where you just click and then it goes back into their application. So it always brings you back into their interface, their user interface, and then you still have to work on the task on their platform. So that's their kind of term about what workflow is.
I mean, we've had this conversation, you and I, multiple times about the word automatic workflow is completely different in different systems. And it's, what term should you use, or is more appropriate is the right word? What's more appropriate for those type of workflows that actually is a reminder that brings you back to the platform? Is it still a workflow, an automation, or is it actually, should it be categorized as something else?
I think it's a reminder. I think that's
It's a really sexy reminder is what you're saying. Okay.
Yeah, it's an email reminder, but now they've called it workflow, and it takes the real meaning away from automated workflows, which is a really, really cool and useful thing. Yeah.
Okay, so if I'm a decision maker and I'm trying to find out how I'm being duped of what's a reminder or an email or a hey, heads up, it's someone's birthday, what's the definition of a workflow that I should be working off of?
I think the easiest method is to ask them, is the show me attitude thing. So when they say we have workflows, you're like, show me your workflow. Because before this, I kind of looked at them like, oh, they have workflows. And since then, since I've started saying, show me your workflow, I'm like, oh, okay. Now I get it. That's not a workflow, but that's fine. Yeah, always ask them to show you one, and then you'll know.
I mean, the irony of that is too funny because Sooling and I are building workflows, and we literally are in this conversation all the time about looking at workflows. And clients are saying to us, you know, this system has a workflow, that system has a workflow, and we're going, okay, well, like, what does it do? Like, help me understand what the workflow does in it. And like you said, it always brings them back to the system, and I think that's a really good red flag. If the workflow is for you to do something, I don't think it's an automated workflow. An automated workflow should automate the task in which it's doing. So, you know, if it's someone's birthday and an automatic workflow sends them something, whether that is a physical thing in the post, as in it triggers something to happen, then you go, okay, well, that makes sense. Like, there's no human intervention. But I think a workflow that is literally telling you to do something should definitely not be called a workflow.
Yeah, it's almost you just sign up to an extra, like a new boss that is kind of poking you.
Yeah.
Have you done this? Have you done that?
Emma on the call is relating to this pain, and I hope other people are laughing because it really is this like hot topic. The other one that I'd throw out there is API. I mean, everything is an open API, and then you ask for the detail and you realize it's like 2 data points, and you're like, I wanted like 100, and you're giving me 2, and the price to get the 100 is now an extra like 50K. And so I'm, you know, I've been stung on this open API quite a few times in trials, and had to just stop trials. And so I guess my terminology term that I would say that people need to understand as HRDs is API. It means it, you know, like it connects, which is fantastic, but get the details on what you're getting, because sometimes you're paying for an API that's pretty useless. If a human being has to then still go into that system, I don't think you're getting a big enough bang for your buck. So yeah, if it's under 10 seconds, it's probably not worth the API headache. Is there any other term? I'm going to throw it out to the group because we've got Ben telling me.
I might give a second try to answering your question about what should be your mindset when you try and pick a product. I think one thing that I realized is that the pitch that you're given has gone through 2 layers, which are marketing and sales. So what you're being presented has been distorted, sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. But what you get is can be quite far from the reality. So you need to like ask the questions to dig through those 2 layers and figure out exactly what you're getting, and not what you've been told you're gonna get. Like, some features might be marketed while they're currently in development and they're trying to figure out the details. Some things might be so obvious that they're not going to be marketed as they should be. So, you know, do that work when you're being given a presentation.
So I'm going to try. I, by the way, Matt, that's a really, really, really good point of the layers of which a pitch goes through. And like, in the defense of those people who are not building the stuff, I think sometimes truly, you know, if a supplier or a vendor is willing to have the CTO beside you, or is willing to have some of the developers with you in conversations, I think for me, that's the vulnerability you're probably looking for, that you're getting both sides. Because yeah, you'd want a little bit of the sprinkle, the good sprinkle of here's what we could do with it. And it's not tomorrow, right? It's maybe not next week, but in 3 months' time, we can probably do this, or in 6 months' time, we can do this. So I think the sprinkle is important, only if it's not at the cost of degrading what the product really is. And I think if your supplier is willing to open the doors of here's our sales and marketing people, and they're going to sell you the great stuff and help you imagine what it could be, but actually here's the meat and potatoes of, you know, what the product is. I think that's a good balance of making sure you're not being sold something that's not. I'm gonna try to read too. Sarah is asking, instantly asking for the SaaS to be transparent as possible, and I think startups are afraid to present the features as deep. So Suling asks because competitors might copycat it or so. Interesting. Do you agree with that, Suling? Do you think?
I think if the company is good and they know their direction, they would always move faster and better than their copycats. And one of the things about copycat is they can only copy the features, but because they don't understand the rationale behind why something is built, they don't have the same connection with customers, the usage and the reasons. They can't ever copy things correctly. Like, in the past, like people, like when Airbnb is successful, people try to copy it, but the copycats usually, they are a bit behind. So that's the thing. So I think good startups shouldn't be afraid. And yeah, but it happens. So that, yeah, people are copying. But the things that with free trials and things like that, you can't actually stop people from copying. And just from what they say on the tin, it's just like they have onboarding feature that's probably quite difficult to copy. But then if you get a free trial, like copycats can do that and then copy the features. But then they are always behind. So that's the thing. Yeah.
I would build on that, Suling, around, remember the point we made about the underlying assumptions, the worldview that sits in that tech?
Yeah.
Like, I would say you can't underestimate that as an edge, so I'm a hospitality specific. I know that industry, it's in my blood. And I've sat through so many tech presentations where people have no idea. They like literally are like, what's an AFD for those that are in hospitality, and I don't need to explain it on the call. And like that stuff is us. And if you're gonna sell something to me and no one in your business understands it, then I think you gotta be really comfortable that your assumptions apply to everyone. And if not, I think you need to limit the features to the ones that do. And I think in hospitality specific, or I think you probably have in other, if you're trying to do too much stuff and your product isn't good enough to show what's underneath the hood, then actually you probably will be caught up pretty quickly because it's just not good enough. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think Natasha has a very good question about like what's the best question to peel back the fluff by marketing and sales. It's difficult. The thing is that sometimes they don't know. So I have actually used software before where they promise a certain level of uptime, and it's a standard thing. And then something bad happens, and yeah, when I really need to use it, it's not up. And yeah, and you kind of learn as you go. But certain things that you can, at least when you are looking at the vendors, are like how established is the company. If it's new, which again, that has stung me before. We have integrated with partners who died, and the integration was very tight. So we then have to switch partners. So look at if they are well funded. But then the other thing is, what is their direction? Because sometimes, for example, they might start off aligned with you, but then they sold to someone else that, open data, completely not open data. That's rare, but that happens. And then it's not aligned anymore. So things can happen. Yeah.
I go back to Matt for you. I think it's a good question. How do you cut through it? How do we cut through the noise? What's a top star question?
Yeah, that's a good question, Nacha. So I can see a couple of strategies, but you'll probably see that salespeople often don't have the answers. That's, by the way, why I'm building a sales path, the startup I'm currently building. But yeah, research shows that 40% of questions salespeople don't know the answer. So if they do, what you can ask is, why can't I do this with Excel? Like, what's the real value of the product there? And you can start and figure out exactly where the data comes from. Like, do you look at this on our backend? Like, we need a bit of context, I guess, to give a proper example. But try and get a bit technical, and the BS goes away.
Talk to the developers; they'll tell you the truth.
I mean, it's because you two are in that world that you can say that. I think what I would say. One of the things that I often do as a strategy after I've got all the sales stuff coming at me is I'm thinking about what's the number one problem I'm trying to solve? What's the experience that I need to fix, right? So if it's pay slips, then actually the vendor should be willing to go through that scenario. Talk small. All right, how does this happen? Step one. Then what happens here? Then what happens there? So I think if you run through a tension point, the problem you're trying to solve, and actually work through the flow backwards to what's the person at the end going to experience, and then what actually happens with the product, you start to find those pitfalls really quickly of like, well, we're not really sure how that's going to talk to that yet, or we're still working on this to do this. And I for me, that's the best way I've been able to call a bit of the that's probably not true question, is running through the specific scenarios. That would be my best strategy tip.
Right. I might add that during a sales pitch, salespeople usually sprinkle a lot of features that you might not be interested in, or so try and my advice would be try and ask directly what they think brings value to you. And oftentimes I think salespeople are honest. So if you ask cash, they'll probably be forced to answer truthfully and be more direct. Is what I think.
Yeah, and I think also ask for, again, always comes back to the details. Like ask for specific things. Like, can I see how you guys do pay slips? Which we didn't ask when we were kind of sold with the fluff. So, like very fancy offices, very, chic looking partners in a very expensive office in London and all that. And then when we finally actually signed them on without knowing any process. And then we got the pay slips, it's wrong, this and that. And you can see it. And I think if we had asked the question, can we see how you do things? Then we would probably have learned. And actually they outsourced that part. See, we could have asked that and they would have said. So that was, asked for details.
And, you can ask for a live demo too. Like if the tool is really good at doing what it does, they'll be thrilled to provide a live demo.
And try it yourself. So that's because sometimes they click around, it's so fast, it looks good. If you can try it yourself, and then you.
Okay, well, listen, I think we could talk for a very long time about the pitfalls and the things in tech, but that's why we're doing 5-part series, right? This is only part 1, right? So we'll keep talking. I think I just want to recap some of the words and terminology that you guys use that was really struck a chord with me. So I think we talked about devil in the detail as being a key part here. Go through that detail. Don't get stuck in the fluff. Relevance. Is it relevant to the problem you're trying to solve? Don't get stuck in the feature trap. Actually, what was the reason you started this conversation, and is it actually going to solve that problem for you? And I love the point on trade-offs. Like, chances are you're not going to get it all. It's like that. I mean, that just doesn't work, right? You're going to get some things that you need, and how easy is it for you to add to it, to chop and change it? Like you said, Celine, what if some part of it didn't work? Or are you jumping into bed that's so intertwined with someone that actually that trade-off of change isn't worth it? And I think that term trade-off really resonated with me. So just a big thank you for everyone that's on the call. I'm going to put up some details. There we go. Of who we are. So, if you do want to carry on the conversation, you've got a burning topic, there's stuff that we said that's, been interesting to you. All of us have put our details on the slide, so feel free to reach out. And like I said, it's part 1, 4 more to go. I'm very, very lucky to be talking to such great people. Matt and Suling, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. And then, you know, there we go.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
And, and actually, you know, we're here at the Pioneers. We like to do cool stuff, right? And we're definitely in the space of helping people make great people decisions. And we really do believe the system in which you bring in just has all those worldviews in them. So make sure they align to your culture and your business. So thank you for your time, everyone. Have a wonderful day. If you're in London, it's super windy. Tell me it's nicer in Paris, Matt. Is it like sunny and beautiful?
It's not.
All right. I mean, Suling, is Kent the same position as London?
Windy. Well, but at least there's some blue sky. Like, yeah.
Okay. I've just heard Boston is also great. So, well, how about everyone go have a cup of tea and a biscuit? Don't let the weather get you down because spring's coming. Let's end on that note. Have a great day, everyone. Thanks for coming.
You.
Bye.
Bye.